In Memoriam A.H.H is an elegy in which one poet mourns the death of another poet because Arthur Henry Hallam was a budding poet, and had he lived longer, he might have developed into a fine poet. I would like to invite you to compare and contrast in memoriam A.H.H with another elegy in which one poet mourns the death of another poet, and that is Adonais. Adonais, where P.B. Shelley laments the death of John Keats. In Canto 41, the poet admits that before his death, the spirit of Hallam was rising from high to higher. As I've already said, Hallam was a budding poet, and so was Tennyson. In fact, they were comrades. In fact, they were companions who together sharpened their intellectual skills and strengthened their literary abilities. But now the poet has lost his link with Hallam. Hallam is no longer alive. A foolish thought seizes the poet. He feels that he should use his willpower to leap over the confines of this life in order to join his friend who is now in a realm beyond life. The poet does not fear death and its consequences, but the poet fears that even if he succeeds in leaping out of the confines of life, leaping across the frontiers of earthly life, he may succeed only in following Hallam, and that he may not be able to join Hallam. So there is no point in doing what he wants to do. And the very thought makes him cold. In Canto 42, the poet admits that Hallam always succeeded in outperforming him. Hallam outstripped Tennyson in the race. Hallam was a better student and a better poet. That is what Tennyson means. And the only reason why the poet is able to claim kinship with Hallam, who outstripped him in the race, is that there was unity of place. Both Hallam and Tennyson were at the same place, were at the same university, were at Cambridge. Now Hallam has passed beyond the confines of earthly life, and the poet hopes that the unity of place will be retained. The poet claims that There is nothing so delightful to one who does not know the experience of afterlife to learn the same from someone very dear to him who knows it and who enjoys it. The poet's point is that the unity of place which bound Tennyson and Hallam together in the past will continue to bind them together in the future. In Canto 43, the poet wonders what would happen if sleep and death had been truly one. In that case, the lives of all, from the beginning to the end, would be contained in their shut up state as a record of all that had ever happened to them here on earth. In that case, the memory of love, the memory of friendship will last unchanged within the spirit of the poet's friend until the shut up state is opened, until it is unfolded when Hallam and Tennyson meet with each other after they both complete their earthly existence. Canto 44 tries to work out a close parallel between earthly existence and existence after earthly life. In the case of earthly existence, we grow step by step, physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. Is that so with existence after death? In the case of earthly existence, we have absolutely no idea of what happened to us before we were born here. We have absolutely no idea regarding our previous existence, regarding pre-existence, except through little flashes, through mystic hints. The poet wonders whether the same is true of existence after death. Will Hallam be remembering all that happened to him when he was in this world? Will he be having reminiscences of his life on earth? In Canto 45, the poet says that the newborn baby has no identity of its own, no consciousness of its own. But as the baby grows, as the baby becomes bigger and bigger, the baby starts developing an identity of its own, an ego of its own, a personality of its own, and starts seeing itself as an individual. The poet's point is that this development of an individual personality, an individual identity is useful after death because it is this which helps the person to retain memories of the person's earthly existence after death. If there had been no such thing as personality, as identity, as ego, it would be impossible for a person to remember to remember what happened to him during his earthly existence once he passes to the stage beyond earthly existence. The poet's point is that this is something he says indirectly. The fact that every individual has his own individual personality, his own identity, his own ego, will ensure that when they meet after their earthly existence, Tennyson and Hallam will carry with themselves memories of their earthly existence and thus rejoin each other as friends. The first two stanzas of Canto 45 presciently delineate the concept of the mirror stage developed by the French philosopher and psychoanalyst Sheikh Lacan decades, even centuries later. According to Lacan, the newborn baby has no identity of its own and it merges its identity completely with the identity of its mother. But at some stage, at some point in its existence, when it is around 6 months old, or when it is between 6 months and 18 months old, it experiences the mirror stage. The child sees himself in a mirror. If not in a mirror, in another child, or in an adult, or in some contraption, and recognizes himself in the mirror and realizes that he is an individual, that he has an identity of his own. And it is from that point onwards that the child starts functioning as an individual. Canto 46 opens with the admission that life is a combination of thorn and flower, an admixture of grief and joy, sorrow and happiness. Fortunately, what happens in the past becomes more and more vague, more and more dim as time elapses. However, according to the poet, in the next life, the shadow is removed over our past experiences and the landscape unfolds to its richest field. The relationship between Tennyson and Hallam lasted only 5 years. But in the next life, it shall appear as the realm of love. In the last stanza, the poet visualizes love as a brooding star which will shed its rosy warmth from marge to marge, from one margin to the other margin, from one end to the other end, in the life to come. Canto 47, the poet declares that the doctrine that after death the individual soul merges with the general soul, the individual soul becomes one with the ultimate soul, is vague and unhappy. This could be an allusion to the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, popularized by Shankara among numerous others. Advaita Vedanta holds that the Jivatman has to merge ultimately with the Paramatman, that the final goal of the individual soul is to become one with the Brahman, with the ultimate soul. Tennyson here feels that this is a very gloomy doctrine, a very unhappy philosophy. It is painful for us to think that after death the soul loses its identity. What the poet would like would be an endless feast with friends after death. If there is no feast, if the individual soul has indeed to merge with the general soul, let there be at least one farewell feast before the individual soul becomes one with the general soul. I think we can find in Memoriam A.H.H, in fact, throughout the poem, a systematic attempt to valorize Christianity and Christian doctrines, and an attempt to reject and denounce, at least subtly denounce, the doctrines which are not acceptable to Christianity. I shall be speaking about it at a later point. For now, I would like to point out that there is a very subtle, very nuanced rejection of one of the cardinal principles of Advaita Vedanta in this canto. In Canto 48, Tennyson makes it clear that this poem is born out of sorrow. It is lyrical in nature and hence incapable of solving complex theological problems. Originating in sorrow, this lyrical work is incapable of carrying out analysis, carrying out systematic reasoning. Love ought to be our ruler. Love ought to be our guiding principle. And what can be done is to attain short swallow flights of song that dip their wings in tears and skim away. Being a lyric, this poem must have a lightness of touch, must not be overburdened with philosophy, reasoning, must not be overburdened with intellectual baggage. What this work should contain: short swallow flights of song that dip their wings in tears and skim away. The swallow is a small bird. a widely distributed bird with a short bill, with long pointed wings, often a deeply forked tail, which feeds on insects caught on the wing. The swallow here, the swallow in Canto 48 is a good example of nature walking into the poetry of Tennyson, of birds walking into the poetry of Tennyson. Swallow in Western culture has always possessed, the swallow in Western culture has always possessed a profound symbolism. The swallow symbolizes love, friendship, affection, family, loyalty, commitment, sincerity, devotion. In Canto 49, the poet observes that there's nothing wrong in allowing other subject areas to influence one's poetry. Let influence come from art, from nature, and from the schools, that is, from the various schools of philosophy. Let art, nature, and philosophy influence one's poetry. But the fact remains that the poet's soul is filled with grief. And this sorrow is the basis, is the foundation on which the work rests. It is not for readers to blame the poet. The readers should not blame the poet. This is because neither poetry, nor nature, nor philosophy, nor theology can touch deeper than the surface of the poet's grief. The point is that the speaker seems to be aware that there is an overload of melancholy in the work, and this excessive presence of grief, excessive presence of sorrow may not be acceptable to some readers. The traveler may look and go on his way. The critic might look at what is contained in the poem and observe the light playing on the surface of things. Did they know how deep are the waters of distress that lie unreached and unrelieved below? T.S. Eliot called Alfred Tennyson the great master of melancholia. The great master of melancholia. No other English poet has ever allowed his work to be obsessed with sorrow, with grief, with melancholia, so much as Tennyson does. We have reached Canto 50. Here the poet invokes the spirit of Hallam. He seeks the invisible presence of his dead friend. He wants the support, the guidance, the inspiration of the spirit of his friend. He wants Hallam's spirit to be near him when he is in various moods of distress. He feels that this presence, this spiritual presence is essential for his existence as a poet. Above all, the poet wants the spirit of Hallam to be near him when he, the poet, will go through the darkness of death, so that the spirit of Hallam can show the poet that the end of earthly life is the starting of eternal life. I think, as I said, throughout the poem we can find a very subtle attempt to weave in Christian doctrines, weave Christian doctrines into the fabric of the poem. That is what Tennyson seems to be trying to do in a very subtle, in a very nuanced fashion. I shall be speaking about Tennyson and Christianity in Memoriam A.H.H and Christianity later. But here, towards the end of Canto 50, we find a very important Christian doctrine subtly introduced into the thematic fabric of the poem. And this doctrine is that death is not the end of life, that the earthly life is a preparation for the next life, and that after this earthly life comes to an end, the true Christian attains his eternal life.